What do you mean my account is overdrawn? That's impossible, I said, staring at my phone in mock surprise as Daniel's sister ranted about the rent money he had promised her. He did what? I kept my voice steady, letting her believe I was just learning about my husband's betrayal. My name is Erin Calloway, and my husband Daniel just became one of the biggest mistakes of my life, but not in the way he thinks. That Sunday morning, when I woke up to an empty bed and a cruel note on the fridge, it felt like a slap in the face, even though I had been expecting it. Goodbye. Never loved you anyway. Real classy, Daniel. I'm a forensic accountant in Austin, Texas, and I've spent the last 15 years tracking financial fraud for some of the biggest corporations in the Southwest. So when my own husband started showing signs of planning his great escape 3 months ago, let's just say he wasn't exactly dealing with an amateur. The first red flag was when he suddenly took an interest in our finances after years of ignoring them. He started asking about our retirement accounts, something he had never cared about before. Then came the secret phone calls, the unexplained absences, and the way he'd quickly minimize his computer screen whenever I walked into the room. Classic signs of someone preparing to bolt. I had seen it all before in my line of work. What Daniel never realized was that every suspicious transaction, every hidden purchase, and every attempt to quietly move our money, I saw it all. Each step he took to try to rob me blind was documented, photographed, and sent straight to my lawyer. By the time he left that note, thinking he had pulled off the perfect escape, I had already moved our savings, flagged our accounts, and prepared for every scenario he might try. So when the fraud alerts started flooding my phone that Monday morning, I couldn't help but smile. Daniel thought he was 10 steps ahead, but he had no idea he was walking straight into a trap of his own making. The phone kept buzzing with notifications, declined transactions, failed withdrawal attempts, frozen accounts. Each one was like music to my ears. My hand brushed against the folder labeled, "Just in case," sitting on my desk, filled with months of evidence that would destroy not just his escape plan, but his entire future. As I listened to his sister's desperate voice on the phone, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. You might think I was devastated, finding out my husband of 8 years never really loved me. But here's the thing about being a forensic accountant: you learn to see patterns. People think they're clever when they're hiding things, but money always leaves a trail. And Daniel? He left breadcrumbs everywhere. I met Daniel at a networking gala 6 years ago. He was charming, successful, or so he claimed, and seemed to have his life together. He worked as an investment advisor, drove a nice car, and talked about building a future together. I was impressed by his confidence, his ambition. Looking back now, I should have noticed how he always deflected questions about his clients, how vague he was about his past. The first 3 years were good, or at least I thought they were. We bought a beautiful home in the suburbs of Austin, planned exotic vacations, and talked about starting a family. But there were always little things that didn't quite add up. Like how he'd get defensive whenever I asked about his student loans. Or how he'd change the subject when I mentioned meeting his old colleagues. "You don't trust me," he'd say, turning it around on me. "Why do you need to know everything? Don't you think I can handle my own finances?" Classic manipulation. I had seen it countless times before. Unfortunately for him, I was better at the game than he was. So now, while he was out there thinking he had drained our accounts and run off into the sunset, reality was about to hit him hard. He had no idea that every card in his wallet was useless, that his bank accounts were frozen, and that his so-called escape fund had been legally intercepted before he even tried to access it. And soon enough, he'd realize something even worse. He wasn't just broke. He was about to be investigated. Because the final piece of the puzzle? Oh, that was the best part. Daniel wasn't just stealing from me. He had been committing fraud at work. And thanks to my careful documentation, the SEC was already looking into his little side business. As I hung up the phone, I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee. Daniel thought he had won. But he had no idea the storm that was coming for him. "What do you mean my account is overdrawn?" "That's impossible," I said, staring at my phone in mock surprise as Daniel's sister ranted about the rent money he had promised her. He did what? I kept my voice steady, letting her believe I was just learning about my husband's betrayal. My name is Erin Calloway, and my husband Daniel just became one of the biggest mistakes of my life, but not in the way he thinks. That Sunday morning, when I woke up to an empty bed and a cruel note on the fridge, it felt like a slap in the face, even though I had been expecting it. Goodbye. Never loved you anyway. Real classy, Daniel. I'm a forensic accountant in Milwaukee, and I've spent the last 15 years tracking financial fraud for some of the biggest corporations in the Midwest. So when my own husband started showing signs of planning his great escape 3 months ago, let's just say he wasn't exactly dealing with an amateur. The first red flag was when he suddenly took an interest in our finances after years of ignoring them. He started asking about our retirement accounts, something he had never cared about before. Then came the secret phone calls, the unexplained absences, and the way he'd quickly minimize his computer screen whenever I walked into the room. Classic signs of someone preparing to bolt. Daniel thought he was being clever, but every attempt to quietly move our money, every suspicious transaction, every hidden purchase, I saw it all. By the time he left that note, thinking he had pulled off the perfect escape, I had already moved our savings, flagged our accounts, and set a trap he'd never see coming. So when the fraud alerts started flooding my phone that Monday morning, I couldn't help but smile. Daniel thought he was 10 steps ahead, but he had no idea he was walking straight into his own downfall. In my line of work, I've seen people use emotional manipulation to avoid financial transparency more times than I can count. But I let it slide because I wanted to believe in us and him. That was my first mistake. Then came the signs I couldn't ignore. Last Christmas, Daniel insisted we keep separate accounts for our holiday shopping. It'll be more romantic if we surprise each other, he said. I agreed, thinking nothing of it, until I found the credit card statements he thought he had hidden. High-end jewelry stores. Luxury purchases I never received. Expensive weekend trips that didn't match any conferences. The mysterious calls from numbers that always went straight to voicemail whenever I was in the room. Most wives might have confronted their husbands immediately. But I'm not most wives. Instead, I started tracking everything. Every bank statement, every suspicious transaction, every lie, I documented it all. Daniel thought he was covering his tracks, but in reality, he was just handing me evidence. One night, he watched me at my computer. "You're working late again?" he asked, feigning concern. "Just catching up on some cases," I replied, not mentioning that the case I was working on was his. 3 weeks ago, I was actually working late at the firm when my colleague, Susan, rushed to my desk, pale and clutching her phone. "Erin, you need to see this," she said, her voice shaking. "I was reviewing a fraud investigation and I found something. It's about Daniel." My stomach dropped. I looked at her screen, and there it was, Daniel's name, linked to multiple financial crimes. Not as a witness. Not as a victim. But as a person of interest. "There's more," Susan whispered, scrolling through her notes. "He's been named in 3 other fraud investigations. Different states, different names. But it's the same MO. He finds successful women, marries them, drains their accounts, and disappears. The last one was in Phoenix, just before he moved to Milwaukee. Everything, the charm, the secrecy, the sudden interest in our finances, it was all part of his pattern. I wasn't his wife. I was his next target. And he had no idea that his latest mark was a forensic accountant trained to catch men like him. For the next 3 weeks, I prepared. Every morning, I kissed him goodbye like nothing was wrong. Every night, I sat across from him at dinner, nodding at his lies about work, while documenting everything. I moved our savings. I flagged suspicious transactions. I contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. He had no idea what was coming. One night, Daniel studied me across the dinner table. "You seem different lately," he said. "Is everything okay?" I smiled, thinking about the trap I had set. Thinking about how his own arrogance would be his downfall. "Just tired from work," I replied. "You know how it gets this time of year." If he had paid more attention, he might have noticed the glint in my eye, the one that said I knew exactly what he was planning. But con men like Daniel never think they'll be the ones getting conned. The morning Daniel thought he was making his grand escape, I woke up to an empty bed and a note on the counter. "Goodbye. Never loved you anyway. Real classy, Daniel. I barely had time to enjoy my coffee before my phone started buzzing. Fraud alerts. Declined transactions. Frozen accounts. Every single dollar he thought he was stealing from me was already gone. Daniel had walked straight into his own downfall. By noon, I received an email from a federal investigator. They had enough evidence to press charges. By sunset, Daniel was behind bars. And by the time I poured myself a celebratory glass of wine that night, I was already looking forward to starting fresh without him. Daniel thought he had played me. But the truth? He never stood a chance. Daniel's plan started unfolding exactly as he had expected. The first call came from our bank. Unusual activity, multiple withdrawal attempts, credit cards maxed out. The second was from his sister, Kelly, hysterical about the money he had borrowed. The third was from a woman named Rachel Clark in Phoenix, asking if I knew where her husband was. Her husband. The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. I'm sorry, what did you just say? I gripped my phone tighter, sitting down at my kitchen table. Daniel Murphy, she clarified, her voice tight with anger. He's still legally my husband. I stared blankly at the wall. He disappeared with my savings 3 years ago. I've been tracking him ever since. I exhaled slowly then, despite everything, I smiled. Actually, here he went by Daniel Calloway. And you're not going to believe this, but I've been expecting your call. Over the next hour, Rachel and I compared notes. Same charming smile. Same investment advisor story. Same pattern of slowly draining accounts before vanishing. But this time, there was one crucial difference me. I've gathered enough evidence to bring him down, I told her. But I need your help to catch him. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. I'm sorry. Can we talk? Just one last time. Perfect. He was following the same pattern Rachel described, reaching out after the initial disappearance, trying to manipulate his way into one last chance to access any remaining funds. I showed the text to my lawyer, who was already preparing our counterattack. Let's set the trap, she said, her eyes gleaming. I agreed to meet Daniel at a coffee shop downtown. When I arrived, he was already there, looking appropriately remorseful, his eyes red, his clothes slightly rumpled, the perfect picture of a man who had made a terrible mistake. Aaron, I'm so sorry, he began, reaching for my hand across the table. I've been going through some things, dealing with some bad investments. I panicked. I pulled my hand away, playing my part perfectly. How much trouble are you in, Daniel? His eyes lit up, just a flicker, but I caught it. He thought I was falling for it. About $200,000, he admitted. But I have a plan to fix everything. I just need access to our emergency fund. I pretended to consider it, watching him squirm. The emergency fund? I asked. You mean the one you tried to empty yesterday? His face fell for just a second before he recovered. That was a mistake, he said quickly. I wasn't thinking clearly. But if you help me now, I promise. To what? I cut him off. Disappear again? Or to stick around long enough to drain my accounts, like you did to Rachel in Phoenix? The color drained from his face. For the first time since I had known him, Daniel Calloway, Murphy, or whatever his real name was, looked genuinely shocked. You know, I continued, sliding a folder across the table, if you'd done your research, you might have realized that stealing from a forensic accountant wasn't your smartest move. Just then, 2 FBI agents approached our table. I stood up, straightening my jacket. Oh, and Daniel? I said with a smile. You might want to call a lawyer. A good one. As Daniel was being led away by the FBI agents, my phone lit up with a call from Susan. Her timing couldn't have been better. We got him, she said, her voice triumphant. The team just finished analyzing those offshore accounts you flagged. Daniel isn't just running a marriage con. He's been operating a massive Ponzi scheme. We're looking at fraud in the millions. I watched through the coffee shop window as Daniel was placed in the back of a federal vehicle. He looked small now, nothing like the confident man who thought he had outsmarted me. How many victims? I asked, already knowing the answer would be ugly. So far, 23. Across 5 states. 12 marriages, all to successful women in finance. I felt a surge of both satisfaction and anger. But here's the kicker, Susan continued. Daniel wasn't working alone. We think he's part of a larger network of scammers. And thanks to you, we now have enough evidence to bring down every single one of them. I exhaled, shaking my head. For months I had been played, manipulated, lied to. But in the end, Daniel wasn't the one who won. He never stood a chance. I hung up the phone, stepped out onto the busy street, and took a deep breath. It was over. And now? Now it was time for me to start over. Without him, Daniel had been planning something bigger. We found evidence of a new investment firm he was setting up, Susan told me over the phone. He was going to use your credentials and reputation to lure in high-net-worth clients. I thought back to all those late nights when he had suddenly taken an interest in my work, asking about my cases, pretending to be supportive. He wasn't interested in me. He was gathering information, planning to exploit my professional reputation for his biggest scam yet. The irony, I muttered. If he hadn't gotten greedy, if he had just stuck to his usual marriage scam, he might have gotten away again. But he just had to go bigger. That's not even the best part, Susan continued. Remember that country club membership he insisted on last year? Of course, I remembered. Daniel had made such a big deal about it, how important it was for networking, how we deserved to treat ourselves. Turns out, he was using it to meet his next target, Caroline Mitchell, the hedge fund manager. He was already laying the groundwork for his next disappearing act. I clenched my jaw. Caroline Mitchell. Not just any hedge fund manager. One of my closest friends. You're telling me he was targeting Caroline? More than that, Susan said. While he was playing the devoted husband at home, he was setting up his next victim. But he had no idea that Caroline had been working with me to document his every move for months. I exhaled, shaking my head in disbelief. Let me guess, I said. Caroline gave you access to all their private conversations? Every email, every text? Not just that, Susan replied. Every recorded conversation in the club lounge. He literally handed us a blueprint of his entire operation while trying to seduce her. The guy practically wrote our case for us. I let out a bitter laugh. Daniel had spent months meticulously planning his exit, thinking he was the smartest person in the room. Meanwhile, every single person he thought he was manipulating had been working together, building an airtight case against him. Have you heard from his sister, Kelly? I asked, remembering her frantic call earlier that morning. That's another interesting thread, Susan replied. Turns out, she's not his sister at all. She's an accomplice. They've been running this scam together for years. She plays the desperate sister to explain why he needs to borrow money urgently, right before he disappears. Where is she now? She's being picked up in Chicago as we speak. I leaned back in my chair, taking it all in. The scope of Daniel's deception was breathtaking. But so was his blindness. He had been so focused on maintaining his lies that he never noticed the trap closing around him. One more thing, Susan added. We found his real identity. I sat up. His name isn't Daniel Calloway or Murphy. It's Daniel Roberts. And he's been wanted for fraud in Canada since 2015. I smiled, thinking about the massive case file waiting on my desk. Well, Daniel Roberts, welcome to your worst nightmare. I was about to head back to the office when my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. You think you're clever, but you have no idea what's coming. Check your email. A chill ran down my spine, not from fear, but from anger. I opened my email. Attached were photos of me, taken through my home windows. Me in my kitchen. Me walking to my car. Me with my family. Someone had been watching me. I forwarded everything to Susan and my lawyer. Then I made a call to Agent Morrison, the FBI agent in charge of Daniel's case. Morrison, we've got another player in the game. Already on it, she said. The photos were sent from an IP address we've been monitoring, James Foster, Daniel's former cellmate from a brief stint in Phoenix. He's been working as Daniel's muscle, threatening victims who get too close to exposing the scheme. Rachel. I thought about Rachel Clark, the woman Daniel had conned years ago. Is this why she waited so long to come forward? It's possible, Morrison said. My stomach tightened. Where is he now? Morrison hesitated. That's the thing. We can't locate him. But he's probably. She stopped mid-sentence. Hold on, she said. The line went dead silent for a moment. Then, there's movement on one of Daniel's frozen accounts. Someone's trying to access it. My breath caught. From where? A long pause. Then Morrison's voice came back, urgent. From inside your house. My house, where I had left my laptop open. I called Rachel immediately. Is everything okay over there? We have a situation, she whispered. Kelly's here. She must have had a key. She's trying to access Daniel's accounts from your computer. My breath hitched. Kelly, the fake sister who was supposed to be in custody in Chicago. My mind raced. Either she'd escaped, or… Rachel, get out of there now. Kelly's not working alone. Before she could respond, I heard a loud crash in the background, followed by Rachel's sharp intake of breath. Too late, she whispered. Foster's here too. My heart pounded, but my mind remained clear. This was exactly the kind of desperate move I had anticipated. Rachel, remember what we discussed? I said quickly. It's time. Through the phone, I heard her steady her breathing before speaking. Hey Kelly, before you do anything stupid, you might want to look at what's on that screen. I smiled, knowing exactly what they were seeing. Every file. Every account. Every piece of evidence. It wasn't just stored on my laptop, it was being live-streamed to the FBI's servers. Plus, my entire house was under surveillance. FBI agents were stationed just outside. It's over, I heard Rachel say. Look outside. The sound of sirens filled the background as FBI agents swarmed my house. Within minutes, both Kelly and Foster were in custody. And Rachel was safe. I drove home to find Agent Morrison waiting for me. Quite a performance, she said, crossing her arms. You knew they'd try something like this, didn't you? I glanced at my house, now a crime scene. People like Daniel, Kelly, and Foster, they always get desperate at the end, I said. They're so used to being in control, they can't handle losing it. Morrison smirked. You just had to make them think they had one last chance to win. Well, with this attempted break-in and the threats, we can add witness intimidation and conspiracy charges to their list. She handed me a file. I'd say your trap worked perfectly. I thought about Daniel, sitting in his cell, probably still believing he could talk his way out of this. He had no idea that his final desperate move had just sealed his fate. 2 months later, I sat in the courtroom, watching Daniel's world crumble. Gone was the confident smirk. In its place was a look of pure defeat. Daniel Roberts, the judge announced, for multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and witness intimidation, this court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison. Daniel's eyes met mine as they led him away. For a moment, the mask slipped completely. And I saw it, panic. The man who once left a cruel note on my fridge, never loved you anyway, now faced a future where love was the least of his concerns. Kelly and Foster didn't fare much better. Both took plea deals, but they would still serve significant time. As part of their agreements, they exposed Daniel's entire network, unraveling a web of fraud operations spanning 3 countries. Rachel sat beside me, squeezing my hand as Daniel's victims, our unexpected sisters in survival, stood one by one to share their impact statements. Each woman told a story of betrayal. But they all ended the same way. With triumph. We hadn't just gotten justice. We had taken our power back. After the sentencing, Agent Morrison approached me with a smile. The Bureau could use someone with your skills, she said. Have you ever considered consulting for us? I thought about all the other Daniels out there. All the scammers who thought they were too clever to get caught. And I thought about how good it felt to take them down. You know what? I said, glancing at the bright Milwaukee skyline. I think I'd like that. As I stepped out of the courthouse, the sunlight felt warmer than it had in years. For so long, I thought Daniel had destroyed me. But the truth? He had only made me stronger. And now? Now, I had a new mission. Making sure he was the last con man to ever underestimate a woman. With a talent for numbers and a mind for justice, 6 months after Daniel's sentencing, I stood at a podium in a packed conference room at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division in Milwaukee. Behind me, A presentation detailed what they now called the Roberts case. Of course, that wasn't his real name. And it wasn't mine anymore either. I had taken back my maiden name, wanting nothing to do with any of Daniel's lies. The modern con artist doesn't use a gun, I told the room full of agents and analysts. They use trust, manipulation, and technology. But they all leave a trail, you just have to know where to look. The program I developed with the FBI was already showing results. 3 major romance scam rings had been busted in the past month alone. Rachel had become one of our most valuable consultants, her experience helping us understand how these predators chose their targets. After the presentation, I checked my phone and saw a message from Susan. Another victim of Daniel's had been located, this time in Vancouver. Unlike the rest of us, she had lost everything: her house, her savings, her business. But this time, we could help her recover what was stolen. The forensic team had finally cracked Daniel's encrypted files, revealing accounts he'd hidden all over the world. I thought back to that Sunday morning when I had found his note. Never loved you anyway. He had tried to break me with those 5 cruel words. Instead, he had given me a gift. The chance to help others fight back against men like him. That evening, I sat on my balcony overlooking Lake Michigan, watching the sun set over the water. I smiled at the irony. Daniel had spent his life taking from strong women. But in the end, he had inadvertently created something powerful. A network of survivors turned warriors, all dedicated to taking down men like him. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't just surviving. It's thriving. You followed my journey, from betrayal to justice, from heartbreak to empowerment. You've seen how I refused to let Daniel win, how I took control of my own fate, and how I turned my pain into power. But I didn't do it alone. I had people who stood by me, who believed in me, who helped me fight back. Now, I want to know, what would you have done in my place? Would you have seen the red flag sooner? Would you have confronted him? Or would you have built a case in silence like I did? What would you say to someone going through the same thing right now? I know there are others out there, people just like me, people who have been manipulated, deceived, and made to feel small. But we don't have to stay silent. Leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts, your advice, your own experiences. Maybe you've seen the warning signs in someone you love. Maybe you've been in my shoes. Or maybe you just want to tell me what you would have done differently. Whatever it is, I want to hear it. Because the more we share our voices, the more we take our power back. And if there's one lesson I hope you take from my story, it's this: never underestimate your own strength. Trust your instincts, protect your worth, and never let someone else decide your value. The best revenge isn't anger. It isn't even justice. It's thriving. And trust me, when you rise above, when you take back your life, when you stand strong despite everything they did to break you, there is no greater victory. So tell me, what's your victory?